What are the different forms businesses can fall into? There are three forms of business to choose from: sole proprietorships, partnerships, and corporations. Each of these forms of business has its own unique advantages and drawbacks, and each of them has an advantage both as an owner, as an employee, and as a customer. This is the breakdown of what form businesses take. First, by count of business, you can see that sole proprietorships are the most popular because they are the easiest to create. But here is the breakdown by receipts. It's clear that corporations receive the lion's share of U.S. revenues. What is a sole proprietorship, and why is it so popular? As the name implies, a sole proprietorship is a company owned by a single person or family. Its advantage is that it's easy to start. You wake up and figure out you got something to sell, you offer for sale, and you're a business. Also means it's easy to run the company too. Since the owner makes all the decisions, there's no one else to answer to, it makes it a very simple business to manage. And if the company makes money, the owner gets to keep all the profits. The downside, though, is that if the company doesn't make money or requires other kinds of liabilities, the owner is on the hook for all of it, personally. The other big disadvantage of a sole proprietorship is that there's a limited amount of capital that any one person can typically use to start their company up. So this means that most sole proprietorships are fairly small businesses, at least at the beginning. What is a partnership? A partnership is a company with two or more owners. It has certain advantages over a sole proprietorship. One of the advantages of a partnership is that you can use the division of labor. Each partner can bring a different expertise or focus on a different area of the business. Another advantage is that you have several partners who can bring capital into the business. This means you can start at a somewhat larger scale and expand a little bit more easily. On the downside, though, partnerships still have very limited capital to start up with. The liability is shared amongst all the partners, and it is virtually unlimited. And now that there are several people running the company, management is much more complicated. You'll have a group of people now that all have to agree to major decisions and important things, which is much more difficult in some cases than a sole proprietorship. What is a corporation? A corporation is a business whose ownership is spread amongst many individuals. The main advantage of a corporation is that you can draw on many individuals' savings and investments rather than just a few. Since you have access to so many different people's savings and investments, you can raise much more capital to start a much larger organization. In return for that investment, a corporation also offers limited liability. This means that any one stockholder's risks are limited strictly to the value of the shares that they own. Another advantage of corporation is eternal life. This means that the company's existence is not dependent on any one individual investor or owner. On the downside, corporations are much more difficult to form than sole proprietorships or partnerships. Because so many different people are involved and take risks for the business, there's a much more lengthy legal process to go through. But the largest drawback of a corporation is that it's much more difficult to manage. Since there are so many more people involved, and since the organization is a much larger structure, management and incentives are much more complicated, and making decisions can sometimes be much more difficult. Why is managing a corporation so difficult? Well, a corporation is owned by the shareholders. The shareholders are mainly interested in getting a return on their investment and aren't really interested in running the company itself. So the shareholders will typically elect or appoint a board of directors. These are people that oversee major decisions of the corporation in the name of the shareholders. The board of directors, though, don't want to run the company directly themselves either. So they will hire a chief executive officer or a CEO. The CEO is the face of the corporation, and that is the person responsible for the day-to-day operations of the company. If the corporation is of any great size, however, the CEO will need to break down his company into different areas of responsibility, such as finance, operations, human resources, legal, and information technology. Within each of those areas, however, there are different subcategories of operations. In other words, under operations you might find production, purchasing, and distribution. And then of course within each of those areas there are subcomponents. Production might entail the production of different parts of a final product. This is one great advantage of a corporation, in that it can diversify its operations under many different lines of business. And then of course at the bottom of the heap are the workers actually performing the work to get the products made. So a corporation is much more difficult to manage, as you can tell, because shareholders are mainly in it to get a return on their investment and are seeking profits of the corporation and ever increasing share prices. At the bottom, however, are the workers, who are mainly looking for steady wages and a good work environment. So you can see that there is a basic trade-off between the need for capital and simplicity. The more capital that's needed, the more complicated the business structure, the more mixed the incentives are within the structure, and the more difficult management becomes.